Good morning, everybody, and welcome to DataZoom's Data Leadership Wisdom and Insights. And today, my special guest is Allison Nau. Allison, welcome.
Thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
Well, I'm delighted. Just for those people on the call, very quickly, as per usual, the format is that we will have about 30 minutes of discussion, Allison and I, and then we'll open it up to the floor, so to speak. So you can send in your questions. There's a little chat box, which if you just type into that, I will pick up those questions once we're done, and I will then ask Allison your questions. So Allison, once again, thank you so much. Now, Allison, you're the founder of Test, Learn, and Iterate. Just tell me a little bit about you, a 30,000-foot introduction of Allison Nau.
Sure. I'm I would say a co-founder and director at Test, Learn, Iterate currently, which is a small consultancy that's focused on helping organizations work through their data strategy, as well as advising some early stage startups on business strategy, business models, and operational and organizational structure. I have been working in big data and analytics for more than a decade, and got my start as a statistical modeler, which is what data scientists were called before they were data scientists. I had thought that I'd wanted to pursue a PhD in political science, and after a couple of years determined that I preferred the pace of working in the business world as opposed to the pace of academic research. So my background is in quantitative research methods, statistics, game theory, etc. And so through that, I've had the fortunate opportunity to work in a variety of different roles in various organizations, doing everything from product development to data strategy, and most recently at Cox Automotive, I was the managing director of the Data Solutions division, establishing it as a new business unit and building the team up from a blank sheet of paper to help transform Cox Automotive to become a data-driven organization while also looking to commercialize the data assets. And having left Cox Automotive at the end of September, have decided to go out on my own and work with a variety of different organizations as they look to mobilize data and tackle some of the challenges with becoming data-driven.
Sure. And on that vein, what are those challenges that you're currently seeing in the world of data and analytics?
It's been really exciting over the last several years to see what the challenges were and what the challenges are now. But I think back to sort of 3, 4, 5 years ago, people were trying to figure out, did they need to have a data strategy? What did they need to do? What technology should they use? What skills did they need to recruit for? How do you structure the team? What is the operating models and processes that you put in place? And while I wouldn't say that it's a well-trodden path, I think that there's been a fair amount of experimentation that different organizations have done, and best practices are starting to emerge. And what I'm seeing now is as organizations have made a significant investment in data and analytics, building up a team, getting the technology in place, working through compliance issues, particularly around GDPR, as the run-up to May of this year. I think organizations are starting to see that just because you have a team of people pumping out insights, shall we say, doesn't necessarily mean that an organization will become data-driven overnight.
Sure.
And in my final at Cox, and more recently in some of the work that I've been doing, come to identify that there's a pretty large skills gap between people's what's viewed as the ability to use information, to use data, to drive decision-making, improve business processes, the skills required to do that, and actually what the majority of the workforce, what skills they have today. There's been a couple of different studies that have been done, one by the National Numeracy Organization, which determined that in the UK, amongst the adult working age population, you've got only about 22% of the people. So you've got about 78% of people that are not data literate, and data literacy in this study was defined as GCSE math level at a C grade or higher.
Wow.
Which was pretty shocking. And sort of really got me thinking. So I did more research, and Click more recently has sponsored a study across business decision makers across Europe, Asia, and the U.S. And they came up with similar sorts of statistics. So between 70 and 80% of people are not data literate. And in this study, data literacy was defined as fully confident in their ability to read, work with, analyze, and argue with data. So not talking about advanced statistical models, not talking about machine learning algorithms, but just the ability to process this information. And I saw that at Cox as we were looking to mobilize data within the organization. There were some people that would get it, were massive fans, really wanted to push the boundaries of the information that they were getting, but there were also a lot of people that weren't picking it up and weren't adopting it. And further, the time spent with those people helped identify that there really was the skills gaps in basic math that people didn't understand, whether that was percentages or fractions in roles in departments that were quite surprising. I would expect salespeople really understand percentages if that's how their commission is based. And similarly, I would expect people in finance to have a really firm understanding of fractions. But that proved not to be the case. And so between the sort of qualitative experience that I had as well as looking at some of the research that has been done, I think that there's a real challenge now because organizations have made these investments but aren't necessarily seeing that full return that they would expect to see after spending a couple of years and quite a lot of money in many cases investing in the teams and pulling all the data together.
It's fascinating, isn't it? Over the years, like you, I've been working in this industry, and you do tend to see a lot of issues with perhaps the visualizations of data that have been created, that have been put out there, and people don't really understand how to apply those mechanisms and what that dashboard or visualization might be telling you. Do you think that's part of the problem, or do you think it's so basic that we have to just sort of go right back to the beginning and basically start to get people to really understand, as you said? I mean, if finance people don't understand fractions and so on, then we've got a real problem here. How does a company change that ability in its culture to suddenly go from 70 to 80% of people who don't really get it to starting to populate that and get more people on board with this thing called data? Do they need to scrap everything that they've done?
It's a really interesting question. I don't think I certainly got some ideas which I'll share around that. But I think because this is a problem that that's newly emerging, and I want to be clear, this problem is at all levels of an organization. Again, going back to the study that Click did, you've got something amongst senior leaders, about 70%, 68% are data illiterate. So you're looking at seniors, the board, the C-suite, don't have those skills. And so this is something that's from the very top of the organization all the way through the bottom. And culturally, within society, there's people, it's socially acceptable to not like math, to not be very good at math. People will talk about the fact that they can't do math. I'm not a math person, I'm an arts person. I don't know how to split this check up or split the bill up when you're out with friends at a restaurant. But no one in society says, oh, I can't read. So there's this sort of cultural aspect, in the UK, and I saw this in the US as well, that it's socially acceptable to not be good at math. And I think people confuse being good at math with the ability to do mental arithmetic very quickly.
Yeah.
And in my mind, mental arithmetic is kind of irrelevant. Everyone's got a calculator in their pocket. So
yes.
You don't need to know, you don't have to do the mental arithmetic quickly, but you need to know what numbers to put in with which operations in order to get the right number out. And then you need to be able to understand what that number is telling you. So I think, go ahead.
No, go ahead. No, go ahead.
Well, so if I think back, to your question around where are the challenges, how is it overcomplicated visualizations? I do think within the data community, we spend so much time talking with each other and sharing, beautiful data visualizations that look very, very, very pretty.
Yeah.
Particularly as they move more towards a sort of infographic type styling. But sometimes in that desire for artistic beauty, people forget that there's a really important functional element, unless you're just trying to win sort of visualization of the day. So I think that data people sometimes forget that not everyone has the same intrinsic understanding that they have when they're communicating information.
Yeah.
But on the flip side, there's only so much you can do if people don't have confidence to be able to interpret a bar chart correctly.
So let me just, you mentioned something very relevant in that in a few sentences ago about the boardroom, and it was one of the things that I've been thinking about recently. And I know it's something that you did at Cox Automotive, but we're talking about data literacy or data illiteracy, and I'd really like to get your view on how you move the data discussion into the boardroom and make it relevant at that level to get backing for data initiatives, because I know that's something you had to do at Cox, obviously, if it was a new division. But how did you do that, and how did you follow that trail, and how did you get the board to really start to think why data was important to their organization?
I think I was quite fortunate when I joined Cox. There had been a change in the board shortly before I joined, and Martin Forbes, who at that time was the managing director for the retail division, was a big advocate. He came from a background in finance and in digital marketing, so he really understood the value of data, and he was a real champion and proponent of we need to have data. We can't run this business without data, and so was a real strong sort of ally and advocate on the board, championing that. With the support of Michael Buxton, who was at that time was the chief exec.
Right.
There were some other members of the board that were perhaps a bit more reluctant. But a lot of it is spending time with people and spending time with their business area, whether that's marketing or whether that's finance or whether with some of the different operational units, and understanding their needs, understanding their challenges, understanding their problems, and making sure that you are seen as a partner that will help them meet their objectives. In the same way that HR is an enabler for a business. Finance is an enabler for a business. We took the position over, as the team over time. We are business partners in the same way that our finance and HR colleagues were, and went through a couple different operating models, and ultimately has settled on a data business partner model where there was an assigned data person who reported into the data team, but was effectively dotted out to those different business areas, and really helping understand that business area, because what we wanted to avoid was the sort of classic business and IT tension where people chuck stuff over the fence in both directions and everyone gets frustrated, and we wanted to avoid that, because really we are an enabler, and in order to provide meaningful insight, you have to spend some time getting under the skin of that business area, and if you do that, then you can develop the right solutions for the questions that may or may not have been asked. And if you spend your time doing that, what you'll deliver should be delivering value, which will help the business, that business area either, generate more revenue or decrease their costs by improving their operational efficiency. But it's difficult to do that unless you're able to get under the skin of that business unit. And ultimately, the board wants to know that their business area is running as efficiently as they can, and hitting their targets.
And I think that there's a slight, let's say everybody's talking about the future of AI and so on, but actually when you sort of rein it in, the boardroom discussions don't really focus. I mean, senior execs and at the board level aren't necessarily au fait and understanding of AI and the newer technologies, but in that sense, how did you have to explain the concepts around data management and why it's important to achieving a company's goals and so on? What really hit it home for them that there was an aha moment, if there was?
I think some of what we uncovered is look to bring data together from multiple production systems, and some of the production systems that we were working with were 25 plus years old. Green screen technology, very little in the way of documentation, and what documentation did exist definitely didn't correspond to what the data reality was. And it was really, you needed to have that sort of open dialogue. And whether that was, in our case, helping identify the fact that because in some of the databases, the make of a car was a free text field, so you could have, there are lots of different spellings of Peugeot, and there are also lots of different spellings of Ford. It's sort of helping to educate what that process is. We have to understand the data, we have to cleanse the data, and we need to work with your teams to define what the different metrics are. So one of the things, working at Cox Automotive, which who owns the business Mannheim, which sells a huge amount of cars into car dealers. What was the definition of a sold car? Well, the auctioneers would think that a sold car is when the hammer goes down. Finance might think that it's a sold car after the payment is cleared. But the operations team might not consider it to be a sold car until after it's been taken off site.
And everybody's got their own definition of that and so on.
And quite understandably has their own definition.
Of course.
But it then can also mean, because we would see the data and we'd be trying to communicate the data, we'd have to be really, work with the various teams to be really clear on what, when they say a sold car, for example, what does that actually mean? And, in some cases, that was almost causing, various colleagues in different business areas to have to take pause and actually think through, well, what does this mean? And you could see that also in thinking about things like, what does a buyer life cycle look like? Or what does a sales process look like? And actually, working, people believed the data would be powerful, the data would change things, but it's very much a collaborative process to help define what are the processes that are used by whom, and which information at which point in the process, and how is that information defined to really improve things. And that is not something that you can do with just a one-off requirements document written by a BA that gets checked over.
No.
You have to have that open collaborative dialogue.
I think it's a very important point that you make there around the ongoing understanding of data, the definitions, and I think to communicate those types of areas, you have to actually show the value or sometimes the lack of value in the data as it stands. Were there times when you were able to get quick wins, or how did you balance that with cleansing and making sure the data was correct, and then making sure that you could run maybe some models or visualize data? How did you get that balance in the team? Because that's let's face it, if you've got a lot of dealers, you've got a lot of systems, you said black and green screen systems and so on, and probably some of the newer ones. How did you actually put that roadmap together for the organization for it to be considered a valuable roadmap?
So what I did when I first joined Cox, I wanted to get an understanding of what data assets we had. I couldn't get a hold of a data dictionary. Not a meaningful one. There were some very helpful DBAs that gave me some data dictionaries that had where they'd scrape the SQL metadata, which was useful.
Yes, of course it is.
From a developer perspective. From an analyst perspective, knowing that there's a field INT_490 with levels A, B, C, and C doesn't really help. So, I brought in a BA who's absolutely fantastic, who spent quite a long time cataloging data assets, and still today is cataloging data assets because the systems change. You need to keep that up to date, but also trying to understand, okay, what at a high level, what pots of data do we have? What data is contained in there? What rights do we have over that data? And where are the biggest business problems? And so it's almost like a matrix of saying, right, actually, we've got, if I rank order the value of our data sets, this is the most valuable to least valuable that we think based off of what, the various hypotheses that we had. These are legally how much risk we have in using this data versus, do we fully own it or is it co-owned, et cetera.
Sure.
How easy is it to get to? Is it in one system or not? And so with that, we were able to identify for a marketing colleague because the marketing was quite different than saying supporting finance or supporting sales or supporting an operations team, where the number has to be the correct number.
Of course it does. Yeah.
Marketing was more interested in sort of general trends. So you know what, it didn't need to be 100%. It could be 99.5% accurate.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and we took samples of data from 2 data sets that were reasonably well understood, even if it wasn't well documented, that were also easy to access, and we brought the 2 together.
Yeah.
For one person, sort of as a proof of concept. And you know, as you build a sort of proof of concept, you know, demonstrating the art of the possible, and then moving into prototyping what a production solution looks like. You know, again, we really focused on, you know, one core data set to getting it production grade. So getting the pipeline in, fully automated with alerting if things go down. You know, all the sort of software development best practices.
Yeah.
And then did that again with the next most important data set, and then you know, you sort of go down the line. But you know, it was a very clear strategic call that was proposed and signed off by the board.
Yes.
You know, this is the roadmap. We are doing these. We propose to do these things in this order for these reasons.
And the value will come.
The value will come.
Yeah, revenue generation or cost savings on the back end, or operations and so on.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So that strikes a chord in just something that I've been thinking about recently. You know, that's the process. That's the way that you start to build up value for an organization, understanding the data pipeline. But there's a whole team around that as well. What's important for organizations to think now? You know, you and I have probably seen it. A lot of organizations will go out and hire data scientists and so on. But as you started to grow, what were the basic things that you needed, and the resources that you needed, and the team that you needed to get into place? What was more important for you at that point? And then, you know, when did you start to hire in or get those more advanced type of individuals that could, you know, get more out of the data and rinse, you know, different kinds of predictive views of the data and so on?
I think it's really important to understand where an organization is in their use of data, their understanding of data, and while certainly there was a lot that, you know, could have been done and still could be done with regards to, you know, predictive analytics, machine learning, AI. When you have a lot of people that are copy-pasting things between 2 systems, that's a much easier problem to solve.
Yes.
And the clear understanding of that ROI, like it's a very clear story. So everyone can understand, oh, if we remove this copy-pasting, then these people can do something else. They can provide better customer service instead of spending their time copy-pasting and aggregating reports. We can automate the production of these reports. So, so you know, really looking at what the low-hanging fruit is, which a lot of it was just making sure that we could count things correctly. And so to count things correctly, you know, as I said, I needed a BA that could understand what data we had and how things were defined. And when I joined Cox, there were a couple of analysts, there were, you know, 5 analysts that were scattered across the business, across the country, reporting into 3 different teams that were, you know, effectively the lone analysts, or, you know, in some cases the analysts, and spending time with each of them, really recognizing that there's value in bringing them together into a single team that would start to establish identity, give them training and support. And so I was able to bring those people together, and it was actually, you know, in some sense, a sense of relief from those people's managers who had just kind of been stuck with these guys. They didn't know where else to put them within the organization. And then, you know, so with, you know, a BA with those 5 analysts, it was then thinking about, okay, well, we need to bring together, I need some data engineering skills, because we need to develop a platform to bring data together from multiple sources, whether that's batch files or whether that's streaming. And again, it was a combination of internal talent. There was a fantastic SQL DBA that had been taking courses in big data at night because he was interested in it, as well as some contractor sources that were really sort of big data engineering experts. And so it was a really good blend of sort of internal resources that knew the business, knew the data, but had been perhaps more self-taught, along with some external professionals. And I then hired to run the BI function, an experienced BI manager who's absolutely fantastic, and start to grow from there. You'll see, though, that I didn't say data scientist at all.
No, not at all.
And I think a lot of organizations that don't understand the different skills and the different roles are looking for a data scientist, or really like the unicorn data scientist, data engineer person that will be happy spending 90% of their time building reports.
And that's an interesting one, because recently I read that 80% of those people who are hired as data scientists are genuine data scientists looking to do really fascinating things with data, to use their tools and their experiences. But what they end up doing is typically, munging data, cleaning it, and then they leave and try and find something that where they can actually use that. So what I take from your response was the fact that it's better to get those foundations right and get the people that can actually uncover where the issues and challenges are, like your BA, get those analysts. And it's interesting that you did go around the organization, you picked up those people who were doing that job, and they were obviously looking for somewhere to be within a community of others that were like-minded, and you're able to sweep them up and then build on top of that. A lot of organizations don't necessarily always do that. They just go straight out to the market and ignore some of those internal people.
And I think that's a big mistake. I think that there's so much untapped talent within organizations. Like one of the guys, Simon Baxter, he, and this is a good thing about Cox, he had started as what we called in the yard and an auction center doing vehicle inspection, but had previously owned his own business, really keen with doing analysis. And then when I joined the organization, he was working as an analyst in a division, and I was just blown away by his Excel macro skills, what he could do with VBA. So the talent was there, and I think in a lot of organizations the talent is actually there. You just have to find that and nurture it. And I think when you think about the challenges with recruitment, we had when I left Cox, there had been very little attrition within sort of the data shared services team. I think there had been one person that had left over the 3 years that I was there, excluding the contract resources, which is phenomenal. But we really placed a huge emphasis on training and upskilling the members of the team. So of those 5 analysts, 4 of them are still with the business. One of them is finishing up his master's in data science, which the company is sponsoring for him, because he demonstrated that aptitude and the attitude and the really willingness to go forward. Is doing absolutely brilliantly. One of the other analysts wanted to get more involved in data engineering, which he did, and we worked to train and upskill him. And then he's since moved into a BA role, which really leverages his strong communication skills as a technical BA. And 2 of the other analysts, again, really focusing more on the communication skills and their data visualization skills, and what they're able to do and how they're able to communicate information is so clear and so elegant. That's sort of where they wanted to specialize. And we supported that, and honestly, it makes recruitment a lot easier.
It does, and I also think it goes back to what you said earlier. They understand the business. They've come from within the business. They know how it works and operates, and they don't have to essentially be upskilled in what the business does and the processes, and can really break things down and start to identify those areas that need to be improved, but also know probably how people think around the organization and how they see things, and maybe can, and I think you giving them communication training and getting them up to speed in that area will probably also bolster that business side, just from a less technical point of view.
Absolutely, and I guess the other side is as you upskill, within that BI analyst function, which is sort of viewed as a starting point for people who could then continue to be become more skilled as BI analysts, or use that as a launch pad into other more technical areas of the team, we were then able to recruit in, as people sort of moved into different areas, recruit in additional talent into that BI analyst function, which is an easier skill set to recruit for than a data scientist or a data engineer. And again, one of those guys has shown real aptitude, interest in becoming a data scientist, and so that's now the track he's on. So we don't. When I think about, and obviously I've left Cox a few months back, but we really wanted to, as the business needs became more sophisticated, use that as an opportunity for members of the team to develop their skills alongside that business need.
Of course. And I think that's a healthy view of actually bringing people along on that journey in this area.
And you can't always do that. Different organizations, I know that there's some organizations that need to hire 50 data scientists.
Yeah.
3 months, and the process of skilling and up training people in that area is, that's a different sort of magnitude of challenge. I'm not saying this is necessarily the right approach for every organization at every point in time.
Absolutely, yeah.
But I think more organizations are in the earlier stages, and there's a lot of really good talent.
Sure, and to just pick them out. I'm going to slightly change the subject here. Yeah, while you were at Cox, I know you were the managing director, but that was very much what I would say was the chief data officer role. You were at the helm of data, of strategy, and so on. But for those people on the call who are budding CDOs, what experiences can help prepare somebody for the CDO role?
That's a really good question. I think if I look back at my own experience, prior to that MD role, and it was called a managing director position because I also had P&L responsibility for the commercialization of our data assets and ran a product team and a sales team, etc. But definitely, a core part of my focus was that in functioning as a CDO, as other organizations would have it. I think communication skills are absolutely critical. And the time that I spent at LexisNexis doing product management, and left there when I was a product director, you have to spend. I spent a lot of time with clients, listening to their needs.
Yes.
Spent a lot of time, thinking and whiteboarding with leaders around what those right solutions would be, and going through that iterative process, which requires synthesizing what you're hearing, communicating it back, validating that you're in that. In that right space. And so I think for people that are interested in moving into that CDO position or have been moved into it, because I think it's not uncommon for analysts to find themselves suddenly in charge of a data function or an analytics function within an organization.
Yeah.
That communication skills are absolutely key. And so that involves a lot of stakeholder management, whether that's one-on-one phone calls or whether that's attending your stakeholders' leadership meetings. That communication is absolutely critical. It's really important to have a good understanding of finance, budgets, forecasts, and that planning cycle, which varies from organization to organization. And it's also really important to have a good understanding of HR challenges to manage and lead teams, because that CDO role, while you are passionate and excited about data, when you're in that position, you are not doing analysis. You're not building machine learning algorithms.
No,
you're clearing the path so that members of your team can do that. And so, that means working with a lot of peers and other leaders in the business to clear that path, promote data, and managing those relationships. So it's a different skill set than working just with numbers or even managing data projects.
Yeah, I mean, there are many facets, I believe, to a CDO. It's just, a CDO has to understand the concepts of the technical parameters, but equally has to be a very good business person as well, and has to have those insights into the business that will clearly provide them with a view of where the business is going, but how data is going to help them. But as you said, communicate that, and just, I've seen CDOs and the evolution of CDOs go through a lot of failure because companies actually just they are putting a CDO in place because everybody's doing it, but don't really necessarily give them the remit to enhance that role and build that credibility. Sorry,
I would agree with that. And again, I think one of the things that before I took the position at Cox, I spent a lot of time in the conversations with them, trying to understand how decision making happens, how much autonomy would I have versus how much sort of management would I have, because it can be very frustrating for someone who's in a CDO position to be tightly managed by people that don't understand the technology, the teams, even how much you have to pay data and talent in order to retain them.
Yes,
So, it's important to understand. Again, I was really fortunate at Cox that when I joined, I was given a blank sheet of paper and the backing of the board that just said crack on.
That's amazing. That really was quite amazing for you.
Which was a real good thing. Again, full credit to Martin Forbes for his just continuous championing of the team. So I think that's it's quite important to be clear when you're looking for a position or you're approached about a position, whether it's a CDO position or whether it's a data scientist position, to actually take the time to understand what the people that are hiring think that role entails.
Sure.
And again, I think as I was at a conference a couple of weeks back and spoke with a guy who sort of said, I hired as a data scientist, I've got these data science skills, but I'm actually just doing this analyst work. Do you think I need to leave my role, or do you think that there's hope that they might change? And I said, what? It's like you and it's one other person. Like, the reality is, with where the organization is, they're not going to be ready to do exciting, machine learning algorithms because they just want to get the counts of things correct. So
you're so right. You're so right. I haven't had any questions so far, but what I did want to do is something you talked about earlier on. You talked about the commercialization of data. A lot of companies that we work with, and literally from data strategy through to data management and data science, but they're all struggling with how to monetize their data. How did you do that, and how do you think people can overcome those challenges of actually building that asset and making sure that they can monetize it, but in a delicate way without, obviously, ethical behavior and so on? Where do you think the challenges are that lie for companies in this area?
It's really interesting, the whole question of data monetization, because the way that data businesses think and operate is quite different than the way that other organizations think and operate. So, I work at LexisNexis, which is a data business. I think about the likes of Call Credit or Experian or Dun & Bradstreet or Axiom. Those are data businesses. Facebook is a data business. Google's a data business. The way that data businesses operate, it's from the start. They think about what are the legal T's and C's that they need to have in order to have as broad use over the data as possible. What are the ways that we can encourage people to give us more information that we can monetize? And the operating processes, the legal support, the compliance support, the way that product management and development is done is very, very, very different than an organization that is not a data business, whether that's a software business or whether that's a more traditional retailer, etc. I think that organizations that are not data businesses or don't have the aspiration to become a data business, I think it's a real challenge. And when I was at Cox, we tried, launched a couple products in the market with varying degrees of success. But ultimately, Cox Automotive made some strategic decisions, which are absolutely the right thing for the business. But in divesting itself of the motors.co.uk business, which is currently in the process of being sold to Gumtree, as well as a joint venture with AutoTrader called Dealer Auction, to mobilize some of the wholesale wholesale data and sales process, etc.
Yes.
Is effectively divesting itself of some of the core data assets that could be monetized. And that was the strategy that Cox is going down is absolutely the right one for the business. But it I wasn't successful in getting Cox to become a data business, but Cox also, that wasn't right for the business for them to become a data business.
Sure. And I think you have to go through that with businesses for them to understand. And perhaps by divesting something, some of their businesses, but equally strengthening their partnerships, as you just said, with Auto Trader, that gives them a completely different proposition.
Absolutely, and it's absolutely,
and a powerful one.
An incredibly powerful one. And an Auto Trader thinks of itself and operates more like a data business.
Correct, yeah. So I don't think you've failed in that aspect. I think that's a testament to the work you've done in terms of getting them to understand data and really what, I think that's where people fall down in terms of monetization, because it becomes so difficult to understand how to rinse value out of data. But actually sometimes doing a partnership is a much better way to tie that data together with someone else in order to leverage the market in a different way.
Absolutely. When you think about data monetization, there's data monetization within the particular industry that you operate in, as well as data monetization outside of that, particularly in the financial markets if you're thinking about a non-financial business. But I think that's probably a later stage for organizations. Then you need to get the data together. You need to know what you've got.
Yeah.
You need,
and before you can do that. Yeah.
And there's much lower hanging fruit that you can
absolutely
provide real meaningful value that doesn't require a sales, recruiting a sales team with a totally different skill set than your core sales team, for example.
Yeah. So listen, we've got a couple of minutes, Alison. I think you and I could go on much longer than that. One last question from me. Looking forward to 2019 and beyond, what are some of the bigger or biggest data trends that you're seeing currently in the industry? Whether that's what you're seeing from Tesla and Iterate or speaking to people, what's your view on the future?
I think that within the data analytics sector, people are going to continue to be pushing the boundaries of AI, machine learning. And very exciting things happening in some large organizations and some emerging startups. But I think that those organizations, and those projects and initiatives, while it's what captures the headlines and gets people excited when they attend conferences, are pretty, that's like the 1%, if you will, of the data space. And the 99% of the data space is going to be helping organizations to mobilize, continue helping them to mobilize their data and really helping them get that return on investment. And so I think that the data literacy piece that I spoke about at the beginning, I think
it's going to be widely
as more important. So that's one of the things I think one of the other things that I see is I think that there's going to be continued discussion, and there already has been a fair amount of discussion around diversity and inclusion within the data and analytics space. Because studies have shown again and again that more diverse teams tend to lead to better business results, and particularly where you've got algorithm-driven decision-making happening, automated decision-making happening. It's that diversity in the teams is really important, whether you're doing things like facial recognition or looking at what marketing advertisements you should provide to which people. I think that there's some things which can be I think that it's going to be increasingly important to have diversity in those teams that are developing, those algorithms, because there's different perspectives will help ensure that what some people might consider to be edge cases are actually fully contemplated. And that's something that I think that's not in data analytics, but in technology more widely.
Yeah, and I mean, it's a fascinating conversation about diversity, not just only in data, but also, when you start to bring in things around bias and so on in algorithms. But I would love to talk more to you. I do have one question from Winston in the audience.
Excellent.
He's actually posed 2 questions. So if you've got time, I don't, and you can give us a few more minutes, then happy to throw those at you. But the first question he asks is, as a data leader, what's been your biggest challenge that you've overcome, and how did you overcome it?
That's a good question. And I think, biggest challenge has been with trying to get people on board with the value of data and analytics who are inherently skeptical of it. And when I'm reflecting of my time in the automotive industry, this is true. Sort of, there are some people internally within Fox, as well as on the people who have had a really successful career running quite successful businesses that are highly profitable, making these decisions off of a very well-honed gut instinct. And who, because of the data literacy gap that I spoke about, may not have the confidence to use information, but also sort of feel like I've done a really good job. So
I continue to do it the same way that I've done it.
I don't need a computer to tell me this.
Correct.
And so I think, again, harkening back to what I was saying about communication, it was really important to spend time with those people, understand the things which they were most concerned about, because even if they're running a business that's incredibly profitable, if I think about some of the dealer clients I work with, they always, if there's a way that they can make even more money, they would love to make more money. So translating things, some of the value into the things that are most important for them, and really working with them to understand effectively what that return on investment would be. And that's in some cases was a shorter process, in some cases was a longer process, and in some cases, there are some people that you just aren't really ever able to get on side. But I think that was the biggest challenge, which again goes back to my point about communication is absolutely critical in the role of a CDO.
Yeah, I think you're right, and there's always going to be those naysayers who will, and unfortunately you can't win them over. Only until the masses actually come with you, and I've experienced this from you talk about ROI, because it's always very difficult to justify ROI when you're working in specific data projects, and people don't necessarily understand that even cleansing your data is going to provide ROI, but it's more difficult to provide them with a tangible view on that until you show them that actually we have optimized a process. It's taken out, that process used to take, 4 days to do by 2 people, and now it's actually automated, and those 2 people can go back to their own, the jobs that they used to do, and they no longer have to actually intervene and do that process, which, that's a monetary value that you can put on something. But equally on the other side, I think it takes time for that value piece to emerge and come through, and therefore it may take a little bit longer. So I think always it's, as you said earlier, that communication piece is so important to actually say, look, yes, we will get quick wins. They may be in 3 to 6 months, but we are going to get them, and we can see them coming down the line. But you've got to be patient, and we do need to get foundations in place in order for us to achieve those gains, and whether that's optimizing your processes and so on. So I think it's a valuable point which most organizations kind of miss.
It's the fundamental business change.
It is.
The insights, but they actually need to be implemented, and that's a change. You talk about automating a business process. Well, that's a change in the way that we operate. That's a change in the way that we operate. That's not something that a data team can do on its own. It requires very close collaboration with
absolutely
the business.
Yeah. Listen, Allison, it's I think time's up. I have had a fantastic time speaking to you. It's been an absolute pleasure to have you on the show, and I would love to talk more to you. But Winston, thank you very much for your question. Winston is actually in Australia, so that's amazing that he's still up and asking questions. So wonderful. But thank you so much for your time. It's been brilliant, and have a great day.
Thanks. You as well. My pleasure.
Thank you, everybody. Goodbye.